an eventful and impactful session. To begin, I would like everyone to rise for the national anthem. To begin, I would like to acknowledge some very special people in our midst, starting with His Excellency, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Kadiso, who is joining us virtually. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Adesuwa Ladoja, the Managing Director and CEO of the Lagos Free Trade Zone. We would also like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Olusegun Ayo Omoshin, who is joining us virtually and is the Commissioner of for Insurance and the CEO of the National Insurance Commission. We would also like to recognize the DG of the Raw Materials Research Development Council, Mr. Martin Ike Mwanso, who is ably represented by Mr. Oluwashola Marinho. We would also like to recognize a lot of people, very important people here, and that shows the importance of this event. Dr. Sheye Oyeleye, Director General, Dawn Commission. Now we have our board members of the NESG in our midst, starting with the Vice Chair, Mr. Omoboyede Olusoya, the CEO of Flour Mills Nigeria, Mr. Wasim El Husseini, Managing Director of Nestle Nigeria PLC, Mr. Wole Adeniyi, the current CEO of the Stanbic IBTC, Mr. Demola Shogunle, the board member of the NESG, one of the board members of the NESG, and Mr. Lao Ijayola, member of the advisory board of the NESG and the immediate past CEO. We would also like to acknowledge some also very important people. Mr. Rashid Sarumi, the CEO of Saro Africa, Mrs. Neka Ewereji, the CEO of the Citibank Nigeria, Mr. Bayo Ajayi, CEO of Rand Merchant Bank, Mr. Olusegun Akintemi, CEO, Page International Finance Company Limited, Mr. Daniel Ikaifo, Chief Economist, Nigeria LNG, Ms. Adebukola Orenuga, CEO, Bank Directors Association of Nigeria, Mr. Namit Mishra, CFO, Nigeria, the members of the Chambers of Commerce, DGCCI France, Nigeria, Ms. Wofai Samuel, Acting Director, American Chamber of Commerce, and other members of the diplomatic community, international partners, government officials, and other distinguished attendees. You are all welcome, and thank you for gracing this event. To begin, we will start with the opening remarks by Mr. Niyi Rusuf, who is the chairman of the NESG.
much for joining us today at the launch of the 2025 Macroeconomic Outlook of the Nesg. I'd like to start by by following the established protocols. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's event, the formal launch of the 2025 Macroeconomic Outlook, organized by the Research and Development Unit of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the Nesg. The year 2024 presented another opportunity to steer the country towards economic transformation by stabilizing key economic conditions. While the Nigerian government implemented some critical interventions and sustained the economic reforms that took place or that were launched in mid-2023 in an attempt to create economic stabilization, and this being the first step towards economic transformation as presented in 2024 Macroeconomic Outlook of the Nesg. We believe a lot more effort is still required as macroeconomic conditions continue to indicate that the economy of the country is really yet to achieve stabilization. The economy expanded in 2024 with growth of about 3.2% in the first 3 quarters of the year, compared to 2.5% recorded in the same period of 2023. This modest growth rate reflects the constraints and the trade-offs from multiple policy shocks, which elevated prices and costs for both businesses and individuals. Inflationary pressure heightened in the year, and inflation averaged well over 33.2% in 2024 from 24.5% in the preceding year. Food prices remain the primary drivers amidst extreme climate conditions and insecurity, and of course other persistent structural factors such as infrastructure deficit, transportation costs, and the depreciation of the exchange rate. With higher prices, many Nigerians have become worse off. And the United Nations organization has declared well over 33 million Nigerians as being food insecure due to natural disasters and the rapidly rising cost of food prices. The official Naira to dollar exchange rate depreciated by 41.4% to close the year at about 1,536 Naira to the US dollars. During the year, the CBN enacted quite a number of policies that supported price discovery. And as such, we had quite an inflow of FX, and FX availability improved, while the spread between the official and the parallel market rates narrowed considerably. On the external side, due to the FX market price discovery actions of the CBN, we had Nigerians sustained a trade surplus of about $8 billion in the first 3 quarters of the year, compared to a surplus of less than $1 billion in the corresponding quarters of 2023. And of course, the whole of 2023, the trade surplus was $3.6 billion. So we've achieved in the first 3 quarters of last year, much double what we did the whole of 2023 in terms of trade surplus. Similarly, in the first 11 months of 2024, total foreign capital importation into the country reached $10.8 billion, marking increases of over 197% above the same period in 2023. And of course, our external reserves got to the $40 billion range compared to $32.9 billion in 2023. We benefited from the stable price of crude oil, which was about $82.6 US per barrel, though down from the $85 per barrel in 2033, but still higher than budget benchmark. And of course, we also benefited from the higher crude oil production of about 1.5 million barrels per day average from 1.47 in prior year. Notably, in November 2024, NNPC announced 1.8 million barrels per day production of crude oil. So things are looking up. But despite the crude oil price being above the budget benchmark for 2024, fiscal constraints persisted and public debt rose to 142 trillion naira as of September 2024 from the 97.3 trillion at the end of 2023. So this massive debt burden continues to be a cause of concern amongst public financial management and fiscal sustainability, as debt servicing continues to gulp a huge chunk of our funds and accounted for 7.4 trillion in the first 8 months of 2024. While the Nigerian government continued implementing critical interventions, the outcomes were impeded by the sequence of the reforms, the limited buffer for vulnerable citizens and small businesses, and of course, limited policy complementarity, amongst other things. The persistence of macroeconomic instability suggests there's a need to rethink the strategies to achieve economic stabilization, to improve the socio-economic well-being of the nation and of Nigerians as we march towards a $1 trillion economy. The optimal pathways to stabilization policies envision a consolidation, alignment, and complementarity of monetary, fiscal, trade, sectorial, social safety, and regulatory policies that can then result in a transition to the consolidation phase of the economic transformation roadmap in the next 12 months. The outcome of these policy complementarities will be an enhanced policy environment characterized by improved regulatory frameworks and institutional efficiency. This environment would then help to attract investment, both domestic and foreign, in the growth-enhancing sectors and generate a high inclusive economic growth rate driven by strategic investment in infrastructure and in innovation. We believe that all this is possible and that if government, private sector, development center, and the civil society all work together, we have an opportunity to play very critical and mutually interdependent roles to ensure that these reforms are well initiated, bundled, sequenced, communicated, implemented, and monitored to engender the optimal outcome, which we hope to translate into an attractive business environment and better living conditions for Nigerians. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a task before us all this year, and we hope that this launch of the Outlook event today will help facilitate discussions on how we can rethink the strategies and policy actions for 2025 and even beyond the year, so that we can accelerate the achievement of economic stabilization and also social well-being for citizens in the country. So I wish us all fruitful deliberations, and I thank you for your attendance, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Thank you so much, sir. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Olusegun Omishakin, who is the Chief Economist and Director of Research and Development at the Nesg, to present the Nesg Macroeconomic Outlook.
Good morning, everyone. We want to present what the Nesg has been doing since the beginning of the year of 2024 until now. We are trying to make sure that beyond rolling out the statistics and data about the economy, we also provide a very strong foundation for how we can improve the strategy. We all agree that for the past decade, the economy of the Nigeria has witnessed a very rough, situation. We've gone through the time of economic recession. We've come out of the recession. We went back into that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and after that, we've been struggling to recover. And so what we're doing today shows that in 2023, the situation we were battling with was quite different from what we've experienced so far, even when we were in the period of economic recession. During this period, we were battling with what was going on globally in terms of the economic rigidity and challenges. We also had issues within the system here in terms of the inefficient economic policy implementations and so many other issues. So it was a very, serious moment for us as a nation to decide what we're going to do going forward, how we're going to turn the whole system around. So it was a very dear state for us. But after this, the Nesg developed a framework called Economic Transformation Roadmap. The idea was for us to go beyond discussing the immediate interventions, but to look beyond now and see what will be the path of growth, what will be the path of stabilization, how do we move from stabilization to consolidation, what timeline will it take for us to start being, a dominant actor in terms of the global economic transformation. So we developed this, and we had three phases. We had earlier recommended that indeed the Nigerian economy can bounce back to economic stabilization within a year. In other words, from 2024 to the beginning of 2025. We also recommended that after that we can consolidate on the gains and then stabilize the economy in such a way that after consolidation, we can then start engaging ourselves on some other more critical economic transformation strategies and ideas. But today, what I want to present shows different tools that we've developed within the Nigerian Economic Group to not only recommend what the government could do or could not, but also to show what the state of the Nigerian economy is. We've developed two mapping tools. The first one is macroeconomic heat map. The heat map helps us to gauge the current state of the Nigerian economy on quarter-on-quarter basis. We believe that this will be more useful, of course, for private sector in understanding how the economy is moving. And so today we're going to look about what is the journey so far. What have we achieved as a nation? What gains have we appropriated? And where do we need to improve? After that, we talk about the idea behind the rethinking of these strategies. And then we roll out some of the macro projections that we believe we might want to work with for 2025. In 2024, we had a series of implementations of policies. We have made some gains, and we did not perform very well in some others. But the overall message here is that among the economic indicators, macro indicators, the main indicators of macro fundamentals, we observed that our external balance, our external performance happens to be very strong all through the year, just like the chairman also referenced. We performed very, very good regarding our exports and imports. We performed well in our foreign reserves and so many other external economy indicators. But this performance could not still strengthen the macro disequilibrium that we witnessed all through the year, especially as it has been led by inflation and weak growth. And so we think that if we look at it quarter-on-quarter basis, we could see that from 2022 and 2023, the trend of the Nigerian economy suggested then that if nothing is done, we're not going to be okay or happy with the type of the economy we'll be witnessing now. We've also identified that some of the reasons why we had, for instance, inflation going up as high as 34% was because that was the year where the government introduced new reforms that will come with trade-offs. And so we think one of the reasons why we need to also manage this is because managing trade-offs will give us the ability to look beyond the initial gain and see what we can do with what we are losing out. The second tool that we developed, this is more on the long run. We want to move the engagement beyond what we are doing now and to situate our performance now based on the historical context. We want to show whether indeed we are achieving stability or we are moving toward economic stability. You agree with me from what we have here. Nigerian economy has witnessed about three stages of macroeconomic trend or stability from 1999 to date. The first one happens to be a period that we embarked on democratic transition. The external economy also was very good then. We had oil boom, and then we had some efficient economic reforms during that period. And so we were at a very high level of macroeconomic stability. But after this, exactly from 2027, we began to witness the momentum such that our policy efficiencies and reforms are not able to rally around what we had gained. And lastly, from 2015, we entered recession in 2016, actually. COVID-19 came, and we struggled all through 2021, 2022. But it's interesting to know that from 2021 to 2022, the index of macro instability, which recorded 0.6 in 2021, increased, almost doubled by 2022. So we fell down to minus 1.3. The same thing could be recorded in 2023. We had minus 2.2. So the rate of deceleration, the rate of declining towards instability was very high during this period. But in 2024, we recorded, the index shows that we had 2.5, meaning that we, on the absolute sense of it, are still within the territory of instability. But in terms of the relative performance compared to what we've had before, the economy seems to be pulling some momentum together to pull out of this territory. Now, how do we rethink the strategy we've been adopting before? What do we look out for, since we've seen how far we've done with our macro fundamentals and what type of implementations the reforms the reforms have suggested? We actually dedicate this report into examining the framework that we introduced in 2024. And the framework is also to look at the stabilization phase. We are going to be more preoccupied in seeing how we get the economy stabilized first before talking about consolidation and transformation. We know the government has done a lot, but we want to see what can be done better so that we achieve macro stability sooner. If you look at the starting point in 2024 when we introduced this framework, we had projected that we'll move from 2024 to 2025 at the point A, which we refer to as the optimal outcomes. We had projected that the efficiency of policy recommendations and so many other interventions in the economy will propel us to a closer level of macro stability. We also predicted that if we had experienced a kind of economic reversal in terms of the reforms, we would likely be in a worst case scenario. But let's look at it in a very close range. This period was the stabilization phase. And the idea then was for us to prioritize productivity constraints, look at how the government can work on this. We were so interested in how we target inflation during this period and how we look into the robustness and the inclusiveness of growth across sectors. In 2025, we had moved from what we predicted. We had predicted that given the optimal performance of policy reforms and implementation, we would have experienced the inflation level of less than 20%. Our GDP growth would have been on the range of 6%, 5.5%, and would have experienced more private investment compared to what we had now, what we're doing now. But the question is, if we are not getting to the optimal outcomes, and we have experienced a situation where we reversed the initial implementation of reforms that we started with in 2023 and continued in 2024, the state of the Nigerian economy will have been in total mess by now. We will have been in a situation where the basic fundamentals of the economy will not be able to deliver any policy or strategies whatsoever. But the question then is, where did we find ourselves eventually? Using the tools that we have developed internally here, we discovered that the Nigerian economy in 2024 ended up between the state of reforms, reversals, and the optimal outcomes. We've gained and we have experimented. We've seen some areas that we could have done better. For instance, if you look at our performance with respect to GDP, we had predicted, in fact, we have projected that the best we could do last year was to land at 3.5 as a nation. But we are likely ending up with 3.2. We've also projected last year that the worst we could do was to land at 2.7. When we compare both the gain and the loss, we discovered that the Nigerian economy, even though would have done better by adding 1.5 percentage point to the current GDP, but we've tried in achieving adding just 1.2. And so that in itself contributed to the relative stability of the macroeconomy that we talked about earlier. But when we look at the case from the perspective of inflation, because these are the key contributors to instability or stability in any country, in any situation. When we look at it from the inflationary trend, we had predicted that the best we could do for us is to land at 21.5, but we ended up going as high as 33%. This shows that the macro stability is still with us now. But let's leave what we've done so far. Let's put it aside and look at where we are going again. So in this situation, we've had an elongated path of macro stability. We had assumed we'll end the 2024 stabilizing relatively. But now, if we continue on the path of total review and efficiency of policy reforms that we are experiencing now, and we'll make it to be so broad, not just identifying macro indicators, but also looking at the implication across the private sector, across the social sectors, and so many other key indicators. We are likely going to bounce back at the previous path of optimal outcomes that we predicted by the end of this year. And that means that we're going to achieve consolidation. We're going to start our consolidation phase sooner. But if we continue on this current path, where despite policy implementations, basic economic constraints are still functional, we're going to end up from moving from B to B2, but that path will not help us to achieve macro stability this year. We're likely going to push macro stability beyond the year, and this is not the best path for us. Of course, I don't need to talk about what happens if we are doing worse than we are doing now. That is point B3. Now, this is the whole picture. And so the main factor that we've identified that happens to be what we need to look into when we are rethinking our strategy is so clear. All through 2024, we've seen the interplay between price stability objective and growth-oriented objective as a tool of moderating macroeconomic stability. Across the world, there are three approaches. The first approach, you identify price stability as the moderator or as the driver of stability. And so you embark on that regardless of what you have with your growth. Or you know the type of cost that will come on growth, whether growth will be leveraged or whether growth will improve as long as we're achieving the price stability. Another approach is to go and say, okay, let's target growth. We'll grow, but we'll then consider at what threshold or at what cost would that be to our inflation. So what we experienced gave us this idea to ask the basic question that how do we balance the need for price stability with the imperatives of achieving high and strong economic growth in Nigeria? We believe this question is going to be very important in determining how soon we achieve stability. We believe this question would pull together both the concerns of the private sector, the citizen, and indeed the government. We believe that this question will introduce another layer or a better level of working on stabilizing our macroeconomic conditions. And so, we need to move beyond the binary choice between growth and stability. That is the core rethinking, the core idea behind our rethinking. We've seen for the past 12 months that there is nothing we can do better if the approach is to either address growth or to address inflation. And we think that the holistic approach that we need going forward is that the one that will help us to have a balanced path. And this is how it works. This is why this is very important. The first reasons why we need to look at it holistically is because it's going to give us the ability to manage trade-offs. We've been battling with trade-offs despite efficient, smart policy reforms. We've been battling with trade-offs. But when we have the combined approach of both the fiscal and the monetary authority coming together, we have this benefit of identifying the trade-offs and understanding at what threshold are we going to be okay with any of the trade-off. The second one is that it gives us to identify or to target the moderating factors. If you look at the trend of the macro instability in Nigeria, they all respond to different types of the economic disability. For instance, there was a time when all we needed to do was to push growth up and every other indicators will follow. There was a time that we were battling with inflation. But this period, it's also important for us to identify which one has the capacity to lift us out of this instability. And finally, it gives the room for both the monetary and the policy authorities to work together, and so that we can achieve this macro stability. And lastly, to achieve macro stability this year, first, we need to continue with most of the policy reforms that we started with. Secondly, we need to prioritize these three elements to make sure that we achieve stability. According to our analysis, we've identified these three to be very important in achieving stability, macro stability this year. The first one is we need to control inflation. The inflation narrative is getting beyond control. We need to work together to control inflation. It should go beyond what the monetary authority would capture by targeting inflation or what the fiscal authority would do by expansionary spending. We should look into some critical sectoral reforms. For instance, agri sector. There is no way we're going to achieve moderated inflation without critical reforms in some sectors. Agri. We also need to look at what the government is doing currently and make sure that we optimize the performance in terms of the fiscal operations, tax, improvement in tax, improvement in other types of revenue for the government. Now, how do we see the year going forward based on these recommendations, an idea? We believe that at the optimal level, if we embark on a more efficient policy reforms, the Nigerian economy has the potential to end the GDP to end up at 5.5%. And we believe that this is achievable because we believe that next year we can come all together here and see that, yes, we have achieved 5.5% in terms of our GDP growth. We believe that if we continue on this current path that is marked, by inefficient policy implementation and serious, massive economic constraints, we will end up at 3.4%. But if we have to reverse some of the implementation, some of the policy reforms that we've started, we may end up at 2.7. When we look at that also from the perspective of inflation, because these are critical macro indicators, we believe we can end up at 24.7 inflation by the end of the year. We believe so strongly that this must be the main focus of the government. If inflation is moderated at the end of the year, it has a lot of benefits concerning all other macro indicators. In fact, we are having it so tough with so many other macro indicators because of the challenges we are having with inflation. We also believe that if we continue this path, we may end up with 34% at the end of the year. In other words, the stabilization period will be extended again. We may not achieve that this year if we end up this year with 34% of inflation. Of course, if we are getting slack in the efficiency of the current reforms, we may end up at something worse at the end of this year. And then we believe that there is a need also to continue the price discovery exercise that we've started since 2023 in terms of the foreign exchange. We believe that at the end of the year, the exchange rate volatility and changes will contribute significantly to the stability of the economy when we are operating at least at 1,200 to $1. We know that the challenge we are facing also appears to be in two ways. The first one is the actual value, which we have achieved in terms of aligning different rates in the market. But the second, which is most critical, is that this is still on a very high level, on a very high cost. But we believe that stability of the current or the past reforms and the current stability we're experiencing in the FX market is very necessary to achieve that. When we come as low, relatively, as 1,300, anything is possible going forward, especially if we improve on our FX foreign reserves that we are doing currently 40 plus. Now, this is how all these implementations, all these efficiency and policy reforms and the new strategy that we're thinking about will play out. While it becomes so difficult for us to see us come out of core instability this year as a nation, we think it's important and it's very possible for us to achieve minus 0.9 macro instability at the end of the year. It looks as though we are still at the instability region, but what happened is that we'll have achieved far better stability over the 12 months than we've started with this year. We believe so strongly that if we achieve this, by 2026, we can pull the economy back to what we've experienced earlier, And so this is the basic result or the idea behind the rethinking the strategies that we are presenting as a nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olusegun Omishakin, the Chief Economist and Director of Research and Development at the Nesg. I want to highlight two things from this Outlook report. The first thing is that Nigeria has the capacity to achieve 5.5% growth in GDP this year. And that's very impressive if we're able to do it. Now, it is dependent on how we're able to stick with the reforms that are in place so far and how we're able to rethink implementation in terms of moving from the binary between price stability and growth, which is how we have approached things in the past, and also in our ability to sync between the operations of the monetary and the fiscal side. And I believe that as we go into the report, we'll see in more detail how these things can be achieved. Another thing I want to highlight is the two indicators, which I know will also be in the report. The heat map and the stability index, they are very key in terms of strategy. And even just the pictorial representation of the heat map tells us what we should be looking at. Also tells us in terms of implementation, which should we start first for us to begin to move ourselves out of our current situation as a nation. So thank you to Dr. Omishakin and the entire team at the NESG for this excellent work. Now, to go on in this event, we would like to invite Mr. Ni Yusuf, the chairman of the NESG, for the official launching of the NESG Macroeconomic Outlook Report for 2025.
How am I doing that? Shouldn't do that alone. All right, thanks. So let me invite some of our directors to join. Wasim, come. Yeah, Doc. When you move it, then you accelerate the reforms. All right, then we need to.
We can call some.
Okay, please join. So it need to be gender sensitive and need to be also inclusive. So I'm going to look for. I was looking for the special person. Thank you. All right, so on behalf of the board of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group and also the NESG community, because this is really not just about the NESG, but it's a community. It takes a village to raise a child. So we have academia, we have the FMCG, we have the banking. So it gives me great pleasure to formally launch the 2025 Outlook, and we hope we'll be sufficiently challenged to go for the 5.5 pathway. And Dr. Mishakin. So all eyes on you. But again, we hope this will be useful in terms of discourse and in terms of looking at various options. And I think for me, the important thing is don't let us take a binary look. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so, yeah. Okay. Okay. I thought, I was looking for his confetti. Yeah. So there's digital confetti. Make sure it's not upside down. Okay, another short one. Yeah. R&D, Dr. Shogune. We can't have. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. The next thing on the agenda is that we'll be having a keynote speech by the Central Bank Governor of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Cardoso, who will be joining us virtually. So let's all sit and listen. Thank you. Apologies, there seem to be some technical issues here. Apologies, we are having a technical issue with connecting. So we'll have to have a brief interlude here where we'll have a discussion about the outlook that we have presented so far. I personally am a trading economist, meaning I started my career as a trader. And so everything that we are seeing here, I have seen how it impacts the market, first of all, treasury bills, bonds, the revenue of banks, real clients, and even individuals, as we all have to buy and spend things. So I want to put it over to the House. In terms of the conversation, we're saying let's move away from how we have done it, where there's a binary conversation. It's either we're taking up interest rates to manage FX, or we are bringing down interest rates and inflation goes up, there's excess liquidity and all the problems that come with it. So I want to put it to the House. How do we think we can manage it? We're moving away from binary to a mix and match. So who would want to go first in terms of suggestions in navigating this current situation? To highlight the real life implications, if oil prices go down, fuel price will come down. Everybody will be happy on the streets, but revenue will go down, and so government spending will go down. So how do we manage it? Anyone offering? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Abiola Lawal. I'm the Eternal Oil. the area I like to amplify a bit more, I think it's what the economist mentioned about sectoral reform, particularly in agriculture. If you look at what Nigeria is going through in terms of inflation and even some of the social challenges, particularly with the youth and unemployment, very similar to what I saw Kenya went through over the last 12 to 18 months. And one of the things that Kenya has been able to do, which has been massively important for them, is a massive production of food in terms of agriculture. Because I also do believe that we can't really arrest the issue of inflation without targeting food security. And to do that, particularly given our current environment, instability in terms of security, we really need to make sure that the farmers can go back to farm. And also to make sure that we can have the right infrastructure to be able to transport food across our nation. So for me, it's primarily in that area of real investment in agricultural reforms and ensuring that we can actually improve our production yield and ensuring that we can move production of food beyond just agrarian primary to actually making it very, very productive. I do believe that will push down the price of access to food and begin to target reduction of inflation. So that will be a very specific area that I think we should focus on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir, for your contribution. And yes, it's a very valid point. Moving away from trying to use macroeconomic tools to actually push the nation forward, let's actually go into looking at real things that we can fund and we can promote end to end, because it's not just about producing in the farms, it's about getting it to the right places and getting it spent and getting it sold, the actual trade of it. So thank you so much, everyone. Thankfully, the technical issues are resolved, and we would like to hand over to the Central Bank Governor, Dr. Yemi Cardoso. Thank you.
Chairman and board members of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, captains of industry, business consultants and entrepreneurs, esteemed representatives of ministries, departments and agencies, of banks and financial institutions, members of the media and advocacy groups, and other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and happily it's still morning, 5 minutes away. I am pleased at the opportunity to be here in the midst of eminent thought leaders to discuss the future of the Nigerian economy as the Nigeria Economic Summit Group unveils its 2025 Macroeconomic Outlook Report. It is indeed an honor to once again present the keynote address at this very important occasion. As some of you may remember, I did the same thing last year, and I was very pleased to have done that. I want to reiterate the importance of this event, not only in bringing together renowned intellectuals, but for the very insightful content of the report being launched today. As a prominent organization in driving economic policy dialogue in Nigeria, the NESG continues to make groundbreaking progress in socioeconomic research, program execution, seminars, conferences, and workshops. And today's launch is a testament to that track record. I must emphasize that the group has made significant contributions to the formulation and implementation of socio-economic reform programs aimed at the strategic transformation of the Nigerian economy. I once again thank the chairman and the leadership of the group, the members of the Macroeconomic Outlook Report Committee, and the hardworking staff of the NESG for their result-oriented approach to their responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, I must also encourage each and every one of us to key in to what the NESG is doing. They cannot do it on their own, and they need all the support and collaboration of all of us to ensure that the overall objectives are accomplished. We cannot tire to dialogue, to find ways to strengthen the fundamentals of the Nigerian economy, put Nigeria on a path of sustainable growth and development, and to ensure that the country attains its full potential in the near future. This event, therefore, could not have come at a more auspicious time, given the global headwinds and the domestic challenges that continue to batter our economy, and for which we must fashion a lasting and optimal solution. Our economy has very unfortunately been impacted by several years of mismanagement. Many of you would know that broad money supply grew 13% on average between 2018 and 2023, while GDP, on the other hand, only grew by 1.8%. This imbalance was largely accounted for by monetization of the fiscal deficit, which amounted to 11.5% of GDP in May 2023. This huge increase in Naira liquidity was accompanied by a fall in forex inflows and, of course, depreciation in the value of our currency. Official rates were artificially held high, while real demand went to the parallel market. Also, as of 2022, foregone revenue from PMS subsidy was 2.2% of GDP and 3% for forex losses, forex to GDP. These are huge numbers, and I dare say perhaps a world record. And it's important to say this and to keep this in view as we navigate ourselves out of a rather trying circumstance. Since I took over leadership of the Central Bank of Nigeria, I am pleased to state that my team and I have continued to work tirelessly to find lasting solutions to Nigeria's economic challenges. I must confess that the pursuit is neither a sprint nor a marathon, but a cross-country expedition. I am glad that the prospects for economic growth have begun to brighten gradually since that time, as seen in the various upgrades and revisions of the outlook of the economy by some global agencies and international organizations. And I hasten to add that we have seen quite a flurry of international investors who are very, very interested in understanding and keying in to the future of the brightening future of our economy. In particular, we have discontinued monetization of deficits, and there are no multiple exchange rate windows. Yet, we must not rest on our oars, especially as inflation remains higher than desired, growth stayed below its potential, and the foreign exchange market continued to experience pressure. The CBN, under my leadership, has continued to make various efforts at strengthening the Nigerian economy and driving its effective transformation for sustainable advancement. To give you a broad understanding of our considerations, allow me to appraise you of the CBN's perspective of the road ahead, especially as regards outlook and our policy priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, the growth rates of the global economy declined to 3.2% in 2024 from 3.3% in 2023. In advanced economies, growth was unchanged at 1.8%, while it fell in emerging markets and developing economies to 4.2% from 4.4%. The decline was attributable to persistent global inflation, tighter monetary policies, and widespread geopolitical tensions. With the rising geofragmentation of global trade, both financial markets and commodity markets recorded increased uncertainties and wide price fluctuations in 2024. In the crude oil market, the prices of key reference crudes, however, indicated reduced volatility, with benchmark Brent crude oil prices averaging $81 per barrel. Sluggish demand and high supply outside OPEC countries contributed to this narrow range, despite geopolitical tensions and the disruptions in Red Sea shipping. Following the 2024 outcome, the global economic outlook for 2025 is cautiously optimistic, with growth projected to remain at 3.2%. In advanced economies, growth is expected to remain at 1.8% and at 4.2% in emerging markets and developing economies. These projections are underpinned by labor market dynamics, energy prices, fiscal policies, and low consumer confidence in some economies. Global headline inflation is forecast to moderate to 4.3% in 2025 from 5.8% in 2024. This decline will result from easing supply-side constraints, cooling labor markets, lower energy prices, and prior monetary policy tightening. Inflation in advanced economies is expected to fall to 2% from 2.6%, while it is expected to decline to 5.9% from 7.9% in emerging markets and developing economies. On the domestic front, Nigeria's economy continued to show steady resilience in 2024, despite significant challenges, which we all know, arising from both global and domestic macroeconomic factors, including the early impacts of foreign exchange market reforms and the removal of the PMS subsidy. The economy grew by 3.21% in the first 3 quarters, exceeding the 3-year average of 3.08% since 2021, and estimated to reach 3.36% by the end of 2024. This improvement is clearly a testament to the results of the recent reforms. The banking industry, on the other hand, remained broadly safe and sound in 2024. The industry capital adequacy ratio stood at 13.70% at end of 2024. The industry capital adequacy ratio stood at 13.70% at end of 2024, exceeding the 10% national and 8% international benchmark. Non-performing loans ratio increased to 4.9%, but remained below the 5% threshold. The Central Bank of Nigeria accumulated foreign reserves throughout the year to bolster confidence and stabilize the exchange rate. External reserves increased from $33.22 billion at the end of 2023 to $40.39 billion by the end of 2024, exceeding several months of the international threshold for import cover. And I must emphasize here that change in our foreign exchange reserves is not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of quality. This growth was fueled by higher receipts from crude oil taxes, increased capital inflows, stronger remittances, and strategic foreign exchange purchases. Despite the challenges, the Nigeria economy demonstrated resilience in 2024, and prospects of future outcome continue to strengthen. Estimates of key economic indicators suggest a positive outlook for 2025. In particular, GDP growth is projected to rise to 4.17% in 2025 from 3.36% in 2024. This growth is anchored on sustained implementation of government reforms, stable crude oil prices, and improvements in domestic oil production. Increased refining capacity driven by the Dangote refinery and the revitalization of the Port Harcourt and Warri refineries should significantly enhance economic activity. A stable exchange rate will also play a crucial role in maintaining this positive trajectory. Domestic inflation is projected to decline in 2025 as the impact of economic reforms begins to take hold. Achieving our overall objectives will require effective collaboration between monetary and fiscal authorities alongside private sector participation. This joint effort is key to fostering a stable macroeconomic environment. Once again, to emphasize that no one part of the equation can do it all on its own. The fiscal and the monetary must collaborate, and they have more and more mechanisms to make sure that this happens. And the private sector should come in where they and really to dialogue more with government to ensure that where there are inefficiencies, the government can use respective tools to ensure that the dysfunctions are smoothened out. And I must say that from my experience, much of the reforms that we have done in the central bank have come as a result of ongoing and continuous dialogue with many of the participants in our foreign exchange and financial sector. The current account surplus is expected to be sustained in 2025 on account of a strong export performance and steady diaspora remittances. Crude oil prices are expected to benefit from supply cuts by the OPEC and residual geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, while increased domestic crude oil and gas production, supported by the full operations of major refineries, will bolster the surplus further. Although having said this, with Donald Trump's recent pronouncements, drill, baby, drill, we never really know what impact that is going to have and when. External reserves are projected to rise steadily, propelled by expected increase in crude oil production, which could reach 2.3 million barrels per day by mid-2025. Additionally, the expected rise in capital inflows and remittances and the reduced reliance on imported refined petroleum products due to domestic refining capacity could conserve foreign exchange, attract investment, and strengthen Nigeria's economic resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, the CBN's key policy priorities are to maintain price stability and build confidence. We will therefore continue to prioritize increased investor confidence, enhanced efficiency of our financial markets, and driving innovation across sectors. In the foreign exchange market, the bank will aim to enhance transparency and efficiency. It may interest you to know that the CBN will shortly be launching the foreign exchange code, which will offer clear directives on the expectations for market participants, ensuring that the market operates in a fair and transparent manner. We will also prioritize exchange rate stability in order to foster a more competitive business environment and encourage the inflow of foreign investment, and in addition, support fiscal operations. On critical sectors of the economy, the CBN will continue to strengthen financial institutions to enable them to effectively support the real sector in sustainable ways. Happily, now that the foreign exchange markets are becoming a lot more stable and the opportunities for reckless arbitrage are gradually disappeared, we expect that there will be more encouragement and more appetite for real sector development. This, in addition to the ongoing recapitalization exercise to strengthen the capacity of the banking system and the stability of the financial system in general. We will also strengthen the ability of the financial industry to support SMEs and empower businesses to thrive, especially through the establishment of the National Credit Guarantee Company to de-risk lending to critical sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, the Central Bank of Nigeria has an unwavering commitment to upholding the highest standards of integrity, transparency, and accountability in the banking industry. I had earlier on made reference to the launching of the CBN Foreign Exchange Code, but on a more general level, the CBN has taken the transformative step of setting up a compliance department with the objective of addressing past challenges, aligning with global standards, and building a more transparent and reliable financial sector that can drive Nigeria's economic growth and development. This department will be inward-facing and outward-facing as well. The department will be functional by the end of February. So I would advise you all to stay tuned. In 2024, the CBN introduced key reforms and initiatives aimed at bolstering Nigeria's global credibility and stabilizing the Naira, given the importance of a stable exchange rate for price stability and economic coherence. Part of the CBN strategy is to enhance Nigeria's credibility at the global level while addressing our nation's unique challenges. During the past year, we took decisive actions such as clearing verified foreign exchange commitments totaling about 7 billion, discontinuing the CBN's quasi-fiscal interventions, and unifying multiple exchange rate windows. Other major initiatives in 2024 included reforms in the foreign exchange market and remittances. We also supported increased financial inclusion and diaspora engagement. And of course, we strengthened compliance measures and private sector growth initiatives. Much of these will continue in 2025. They'll be strengthened and they'll be deepened. The introduction of the foreign exchange codes, the electronic foreign exchange matching system, and the foreign currency disclosure deposit repatriation and investment scheme will enhance market efficiency and transparency. These, of course, as I've said, and efficient in the foreign exchange market and reduce the disparity between the bureau de change and official exchange rates and foster stability in the market. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy that so far we can see the results of a lot of those efforts on our market. We are definitely going to strengthen our mechanisms to constantly be on the watch out for the market participants and to ensure that all those who are in that market are subjected to the best practices, and those who fail to conform will be appropriately dealt with. To boost, now these were deployed to increase transparency and efficiency in the foreign exchange market, reduce disparity between the bureau de change and official exchange rates, and foster stability in the market. I think we can all see that. And as I said, that is something that is going to continue. To boost diaspora remittances through formal channels, the bank equally granted approval in principle to 14 new international money transfer operators and also launched the non-resident BVN recently to enable Nigerians overseas to have access to banking services in the place of their birth. Again, a clear example of recent initiatives and recent products which we have launched that are in response to the dialogue we've had with many people overseas, understanding their problems, understanding the opportunities they are looking for in Nigeria, and able to make life much easier for them through launching these particular products. And I'm very, very confident that we are going to see a very positive outcome from, in fact, when I say I'm very, very confident, we're already seeing the impact is already starting to show. The IMTOs and foreign remittances, it's remarkable. There's something that I always say, there's nothing better than creating mode all we like, that, hey, our economy is experiencing very, very grave difficulties. Foreign exchange is dwindling. Oil prices are down. Oil price production is down. What are we going to do? But rather than do that, we had to look for new ways and new opportunities. And we are seeing and are very pleased with the outcome of what is coming out of all this. And my last discussions with the diasporans in Washington and in Texas later last year, everybody's committed, very, very committed to doubling the levels that we are in. So there's good things ahead on the foreign exchange side, as far as I can see. Our achievements with these reforms have been encouraging and will continue to materialize into the long term. Our efforts have resulted in significant economic milestones in 2024, with over $6 billion in foreign capital inflows into Nigeria, external reserves exceeding 40 billion, signaling growing investor confidence. Again, we emphasize reserves going up, not just in numbers, but in the quality of our reserves. As we progress through 2025, we aim to ensure that the reforms and market-oriented policies will support a more competitive business environment. These developments carry significant implications for businesses operating in Nigeria, requiring them to adapt to an evolving economic landscape. Yes, there's a lot to be said for the fact that we've found ourselves in a situation where the foreign exchange rate has adjusted. That has its negatives for those, especially in a situation where we realize that we are so import dependent. But it also has offered an opportunity. And that opportunity, believe me, I see a lot, especially foreign investors coming in to want to take advantage of it. Because at this stage in the game, our currency is a lot more competitive, and the implications for exports and the implications for productive activity is significant. By way of conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that the Central Bank of Nigeria remains a proactive monetary authority with the goal of ensuring price stability, monetary stability, and exchange rate stability. We will continue to evolve innovative policies and initiatives that support the critical sectors of our economy and deliver the all-round sustainable growth and advancement that we all desire. Once again, I thank the Nigeria Economic Summit Group for giving me this opportunity to come and address this very important body that is here this morning, going on to the afternoon. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Governor. Thank you so much for the insightful keynote speech. Two things to highlight, or one thing to highlight: no one part of the equation can do it alone. We need the monetary, the fiscal, and the private sector to come together to push this nation forward. And that's what we're here for. So going on with the session, before we move on with the panel session, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Simon Omo Ezemo, who is the Director, Special Duties, representing the Permanent Secretary, Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Mrs. Oluwatoyin Madeyin, who is the Accountant General of Federation and is joining us virtually. Now, next on our agenda is the panel session. And to moderate the panel session, we have Mrs. Rolake Akinkugbe Filani, who is an anchor who's the anchor of the Business Week at Arise News, and also an award-winning C-level executive at a leading financial institution. So I'll hand over to Rolake to introduce the rest of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Oladele. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be moderating the session today. I'd first of all like to stand on all protocols, as we say, but also thank the NESG chair, the CEO, and of course, Dr. Misaki for that presentation. I also have to pay tribute to the work that the CBN governor is doing at the central bank, Dr. Layemi Cardoso. I think hearing his presentation there, I felt we could all go home. But between Dr. Misaki's 5.5% and Mr. Cardoso's 4.1%, I think it's safe to say that we'll probably land somewhere in the middle at the end of the year. So hopefully it's a soft landing. But in the words of economist John Maynard Keynes, something he said the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas, but in escaping from old ones. And to help us embrace new ideas around reforming Nigeria and the policy environment, I have a distinguished panel who I'd like to invite. Two of them are virtual, and two of them are physical here in the room, so it'll be a hybrid session. First, joining us online is Dr. Christian H. Ebeke. He's the Nigeria country representative for the IMF, a global authority on macroeconomic stability, and hopefully he joins us there. If we can see him visually, that would be great. We also have online Professor Bright Erega, Professor of Macroeconomics at Pan Atlantic University. He's a distinguished economist with a sharp lens on macroeconomic policy issues. And here, I will invite to take a seat in the middle, Dr. Samir Naji Massa. Please give him a warm round of applause as he comes. He's senior economist for Nigeria at the World Bank. His expertise bridges economic reform and social impact issues. And of course, one of the men of the moment in our nation, I hope you wouldn't mind me saying that, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, chairman of the Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee, a champion for innovative tax policies and fiscal sustainability. Can we give all the panelists a very warm round of applause? Hello. Okay, fantastic. So we have everybody online, I believe. We should also have Professor Erega online. Okay, so I mean, as we start the discussion, just very briefly, one of the things that occurred to me when Dr. Misaki was presenting the outlook and he was showing the trajectory from stabilization to consolidation, it then occurred to me, what happens come 2027? Often we see that economic lull when we reach a new election and political cycle. And I wanted us we know in Nigeria, across many African nations too, politics and economics are inextricably linked, and they help to catalyze or slow down the reform agenda. So perhaps the first question I have will go to Dr. Christian Ebeke. Nigeria's inflation rate is something that every street economist in the country watches. December, we were at 34.8%. What do you think the authorities need to do differently this year? And specifically, how can the fiscal authorities complement the efforts of the CBN in tackling inflation?
Thank you, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you, and sorry for not being there in person. But again, thank you so much for Nesg for inviting us to discuss very important issues here in 2025. I think your questions about Nigerian inflation reaching, all-time high levels, 34.8% in December, is something that has, been discussed a lot in various circles, and is also something that I know the Central Bank of Nigeria is clearly focused at bringing inflation down this year. Then your question is about the fiscal authorities, how they can complement the central bank effort. I would say there are a few things, right? First of all, it's very important that those efforts to bring inflation down by the fiscal authorities being done in a context of better coordination between fiscal and monetary policy, right? Here, what we're talking about, for example, is really one of the key decisions that has taken place last year is the commitment by both the central bank and the fiscal authorities to really strengthen the coordination on the ways and means, right? We did not see ways and means accrued again in 2024 compared to the tradition that we have seen in Nigeria over the past decade. This is extremely important, and it was well done. And this is something that clearly is, should bring inflation down by really tightening financial conditions, but also by reducing money in circulation. The other important thing that is very important for the fiscal authorities to do is really to tackle any distributional consequences of the reforms that are being implemented. And those reforms be, naira flexibility, or, the reduction in the fuel subsidy, or the completion of the fuel subsidy reform on October 2nd. We know that, these two key reforms implemented in Nigeria will have distributional consequences, and the most vulnerable may not be able to cope. Fiscal policy has a key role to play, first because the transmission lag of fiscal policy are shorter compared to the transmission lag of monetary policy. So issues such as accelerating social protection are very, very important. That's how fiscal policy can clearly complement what the monetary policy is doing on the social protection front. So there is a scheme that is being strengthened, the cash transfer program, but also many other initiatives to really make sure that those the income at the lowest decile of the distribution can really receive the needed support there. But for fiscal policy to do all of this, there's a need to further strengthen fiscal space. And I'm glad that Taiwo is in the room. He's the architect of many of the reforms that are being done exactly to strengthen revenue, but in a manner that protects the poor, but also incentivize businesses. So again, it's all about how we can think about fiscal consolidation with a social agenda, fiscal consolidation with human face, and fiscal consolidation to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected.
Thank
you.
Again,
that's how the coordination with fiscal policy, with monetary policy can be designed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christian Ebeke. I think that deserves a round of applause. There are two things that really struck me about what he said. Of course, he talked about one of the big elephants in the room, the ways and means, which has a lot to do with governance, and we'll peel back into that a bit later. But I wanted to pick up Dr. Same on the cost of reforms. When we talk about growth has to be equitable, it has to be inclusive. What do the cost of reforms that we've seen in 2023, 2024 tell us about how we need to approach the reform agenda in 2020 reforms? fuel subsidy, FX liberalization, and others?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And again, thanks for NESG for hosting us. And congratulations for the report. It's very well done. So on the reforms, I want to put it kind of a little bit of a spin to it. Is actually the cost of not doing reforms. In the sense that, as the governor has said, the cost of not doing reforms was 2% of GDP of fuel subsidy and 3% of GDP of FX subsidy. That's 5% of GDP. And that's, that's extremely very high. Now, obviously, these reforms, in a way, the analogy I would put it is someone, having a very hard condition, medical condition, and had to make very tough choices. And I don't think we should not forget that at some point in Nigeria in 2022, the debt service to revenue was 100%. Now, the good news is we're around 50%, and that's a big decline. Now, the cost of reforms comes mainly by having a higher inflation, and that, in the case of Nigeria specifically, given that food inflation is impacted by the FX and by the fact that a lot of agricultural products are impacted by the price of petrol, etc., that means that the impact of these reforms is being somewhat felt by the poor and most vulnerable more. And in that sense, this is where I think I would compliment what Christian said. It's very important for the government to acknowledge that or to continue on the good reforms that have started on the social protection, but I would think to accelerate the rollout of these cash transfers, also scale them up, because I think now the target is 15 million, but this could be expanded. But more importantly, to finance them over the future. And if you just do simple arithmetics, if the cost of the fuel subsidy was 10 trillion per year, we can easily, or the government can easily finance some of it in the budget for the poor and vulnerables to kind of reduce that cost of reform. So I think it would be very important to continue or to encourage the authorities here to scale up and accelerate these interventions, which are time-bounded, but also which are targeted at those that are really impacted and done through a digital way to avoid any potential misuse in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting, you mentioned, financing these cash transfers and bottom of the pyramid policies through the budget. But it raises in my mind issues around fiscal sustainability. And I'd like to come to you, Mr. Tao Oyodele. I think in Nigeria today, you'd have to be living under the rock if you haven't heard about your committee, right? You've been in the news so much that every Nigerian has a stake in what you do. But can you help us to really highlight what the principle underlying fiscal sustainability in Nigeria today is? What does fiscal sustainability in Nigeria really look like?
Thank you very much, and good day to everyone. And thank you to the NESG for inviting me. I think maybe broadly, I'll just make a few remarks on some of the points I had already. And also the fact that I listen to a lot of analysts and they're wondering why on earth is the government expecting inflation to be 15% in 2025. But they haven't been supporting their point with data. And so I just thought maybe it's good to also put out there the way I see it. Maybe it can help with how we analyze those issues. Otherwise, what you find in many cases is that the inflation expectation itself can be self-fulfilling, even though it may not be supported by data. So first one is, which is perhaps one of the biggest impact, is the base effect. And I just want to explain it in a very simple way. In 2024, the average inflation was about 33%. So it meant that 100 naira was how we started. We ended at 133. If things are as bad in 2025 as they were in 2024, you have a further increase of 33 naira. 33 naira over 133 is 25. So the base effect alone tells you that you should expect 25%, all things being equal. But all things will not be equal. Because in 2024, you have the FX impact. We started at 900, we got to 1.6. At some point, it was more than 1.6. That's huge. We have the fuel. Went up by, I don't know whether 200% from where we started. So all of that is no longer there. In fact, when it comes to fuel, not only is it that we had the increase in the pump price, it was also that we had scarcity. Scarcity is a factor for inflation in Nigeria. It pushes prices up because we can't find fuel to buy. Now we have security of supply. We have that expectation that price will be stable. Trump can also help us to bring the price down a little bit. Whatever we lose to the Federation account, we make up for it from output and productivity. So I thought to put that out there, that I feel like based on the data we have, 15% is realistic for 2025. From the fiscal sustainability point of view, it has a bit of number of components. One of it is government revenue, which is the focus around, if you just look at what the CBN governor said, saving 5% of GDP alone, you can go and sleep and say that, because what we had before was that spending was rising faster than revenue, and it was increasing the deficit. And that in itself was not a problem. We were printing money to close the gap. Now we're no longer printing money. That's good news. The second point I would like to make, sometimes where I disagree with many of my friends who are economists, is thinking that because of spending from the fiscal side, the budget is 50 trillion for the federal government. I think all the states are around 20-something trillion. That spending in and of itself does not fuel inflation generally, because it's money from the private sector that goes to the government and then it comes back. It's when you have new money that is not supported by output that you fuel inflation. Although government can be more intentional as to how they spend that money so that it's able to stimulate growth. There's also the part around spending, so that's government revenue. There's the one from subsidy savings, there's one from the tax reforms, and then we have the one from efficiency gains and all of this harmonization we're trying to do with government agencies. It will be sustained in 2025. Government spending, it's an ongoing conversation, but there's a plan to spend more on infrastructure in 2025. And because of that, you also expect to have the impact. It may not be immediate, but somewhere along the line. And finally is, how do you finance all of this, particularly the deficits? Yeah. Now, from the deficit financing point of view, there's a better plan, in my view, based on the information that I have, about how you finance the deficit. Because if you finance the deficit by borrowing, then that's better than by printing money. And there's a plan already as to how to close that gap. And that plan is indeed realistic. We also expect that we're going to have an upside to revenue expectations. We have not incorporated into the budget what we expect to come from our reforms.
What's the upside? Is that from oil revenues? What's the catalyst for that upside?
Yeah, so it's a number of areas in terms of revenue expectation that we expect from the reforms. One of it is by harmonizing tax collections, we think that we're going to close significant leakages that will be in the trillions of naira, right? In addition to that, you have fiscalization that we're trying to do with VAT, even though the governor said don't increase the rate. We think even without increasing the rate, we can collect more by closing the compliance gap, which is as high as about 70%. Once we're able to do our fiscalization that is in the bill, we expect that revenue should go up very quickly and very fast around VAT. We also have other reforms everywhere, from corporate tax to personal income tax, and this is where the revenues will come from. So overall, it's therefore right to conclude that from a fiscal sustainability point of view, we've made a turn and we're now moving in the right direction.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to dissect in all of what you've said. But I want to leverage that to come to Professor Bright Erega, of the Professor of Macroeconomics at Pan Atlantic University. One of the things that I've always found very intriguing about Nigeria is the basis for economic policy making. And if you're in academia and policy making, you usually focus on evidence. So evidence-based analysis, it's critical to economic policy making. So I guess the question to you is, what is the evidence, or what is your interpretation of economic events in Nigeria that make you positive about 2025 outcomes? What evidence are you really looking at to signal a positive outcome for the 2025 outlook?
All right, okay. Once again, let me thank the NSG for the invitation and to say that I'm standing on two legs, one at the NSG and then one on the other side. First, I would say that, and it's something all of us agree to, all stakeholders agree, that policy making in Nigeria, whether government or the private sectors, has always been based on evidence-based analysis. And this is also the standpoint of government. I say that because if you look at, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please continue.
Okay, so if from 1960 to date, for instance, one classic example I can give is the national development plans that we have had. And so in recent times, for instance, the ERGP is one of them. If you take a look at that document, you will know that there's a macro framework that guides that, and that comes from evidence-based analysis that designed that macro framework. The same thing for the NDP 2025, where you have a macro framework with projections that cut across about 5 years. And then the Agenda 2050, and then in recent times, even the what we call the Renewed Hope Agenda document that you see how there, right? So my point is that evidence has always guided, whatever reform or policy decision that has ever taken place till now. And so one recent figure to quote in terms of what I expect the figures to be in 2025 is the MTEF. The MTEF is what we call the fiscal strategy of government, and it has projected that inflation in this year will go to about 15%, right? And then growth to about 4%, right? And then exchange rate to about 1.5. Now, what will drive those figures? By the analysis, right? It's been, you know that this year you are going to expect growth higher than last year, and if inflation is going to trend down a bit, then we should expect, better livelihood for the household and all of that. So my point is that in terms of macroeconomic outlook, this year is going to be better than last year. And when it comes to evidence analysis that guide policy decision and reform making, it has always been the case. If you talk about the FS stabilization program for the government that is just done last year, the subsidy removal or the stoppage of the monetary financial deficit that was done, or even the current tax reform that is being pushed through at the National Assembly. You take a look at all of that, they are all driven by evidence. And one figure I can quote with regards to, for instance, when this government came on board was in, let's say, early 2023, where we had a debt service revenue of almost 149%. Now, with the reforms that have been done, it has gone down to almost about 61.9% in Q3 2024. And so the idea is that there will be some level of fiscal consolidation. And by that, we are talking about revenue increase, ensuring that the fiscal deficit to GDP goes to almost in control levels, and with that, you expect some level of impact on growth and some level of impact on revenue generation, and also bringing down what we call debt service to revenue. So this is what will definitely drive what will happen in 2025. But I know quite well that in terms of debt to GDP ratio, it's on the increased part. But normally in analysis, you do not interpret that at a point in time. It is interpreted over a period of time. And for the father, in terms of those sustainability issue over the years, we've been having real interest rate growing faster than growth. And now that we've been having growth, for instance, in the last 3 quarters, and if we bring in Q4 2025, that will even grow more than the Q3, we expect that average growth for 2024 will be higher than in the last 3-4 years, and which the CBN governor also presented. So with all of that, I expect that we'll have some level of better performance outcome for 2025 compared to 2020.
Thank you very much, Professor Regan. I have to apologize to the audience for some of the sound issues there on the virtual platform. But still on the virtual platform, Dr. Ebeke, I wanted to ask you about something you had mentioned earlier, which was on ways and means securitization of the ways and means facility. It has raised a lot of concerns around debt sustainability and even the crowding out of private investment. I guess my question is this global best practice? But intuitively, most people would say no. But I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can tackle that issue. What sort of governance reforms need to be put forward? And is it really the main contributor to Nigeria's debt burden today?
Thank you, and it's indeed a very good question. I think the ways and means issues in Nigeria, you have to look at it as, we should have not been in that position, right, to start with. I mean, cleaning up this big problem is taking time. The persistent impact of the ways and means on inflation, but also just generally in terms of financial conditions and monetary aggregate is still there, right? So cleaning up the mess is taking some time, and the CBN is trying to mop up excess liquidity, but just the practice also of having deficit monetization across the board, as this has been the practice in Nigeria for several years. This is now over, right? So again, big congratulations to both the central bank and the monetary fiscal authorities in that regard. Now, when it comes to the securitization of this, central banks around the world, they have memorandum of understanding with fiscal authorities on many matters, including, for example, this type of liability management. I think the securitization has the benefit of spreading out the maturities, reducing also the debt service because the interest rate is lower, but also this has been done transparently, right? So it's also good to have it on the balance sheet, and it's very clear, and there is a path, and those payments are being done over time. But the most critical, ensuring that central bank independence is preserved, because when the central bank is really independent and has a focus, let's say, on inflation in the context of inflation targeting, you have little risk of seeing pressures to, providing advances to fiscal policy. But at the same time, when the coordination is also stronger between fiscal and monetary policy, well, the fiscal authority has no incentive really to seek advances from the central bank to monetize the deficit. But when it comes to the level, like 10% of last year revenue or 5% of last year revenue, depending on countries, the main problem is not really the rate, right? So other countries in Africa have advances to the fiscal authority from the central bank. I think the crux of the matter is really the credibility of the agreement, right? If these are intra-year current account operations, right? If this is something that is being repaid at the end of the year, as the law says it, then this has to be enforced. And I think in Nigeria, what we are seeing is really that, there's been this commitment to no longer rely on this. And over time, I think one should really expect, durable commitment on that front. But again, central bank independence, fiscal prudence, the two combined, you should not really be seeing, again, this type of pressures on the macroeconomy, including the impact it had on the parallel exchange rate, on many other things, including inflation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christian Ebeke. I think, again, this kind of anchors on the governance issue. In principle, this is a structure that exists in other parts of the world, but it's the implementation and compliance with those agreements that are an issue. Dr. Samir, there's, the pass-through effect of exchange rate depreciation on inflation is probably accounts for, I would hazard, maybe over 50% of the pass-through into inflation. How can we kind of sever, if you like, that link between the exchange rate depreciation and inflation? And if we can, what can we do to mitigate that? Because it seems to be a big factor.
Yeah, sure. So I think the answer, if you want, is I don't think you can fully offset it, right? So it will always be there, especially in a country where it's, to some extent, has a lot of imports, right? Yeah. So whatever you do on the import side, you'll have to bear the burden. I think one angle to it would be very important here to, on the inflation side, on the exchange rate side, what really matters is not the level itself, right? So if the level is, 1,000 or 2,000, obviously it will have an impact on inflation, but it also have an impact also on other factors in the economy. What matters is how away your rate is to the market, because that also, and I think what the governor said, Nigeria currently, in terms of the real, if you want, the real value of the naira, is very competitive, and that is a really golden chance for the country to move more to an export-oriented economy and move away from oil. And the more you move away from oil, and this is, I think, where the report is looking at, is to kind of start thinking a little bit from stabilization, build on that, kind of cement that, and move more to high growth. That's how you kind of move, if you want, into more prosperity into the country. Now, I think what's critical here in terms of the inflation dynamics is, one, is to stay the course. And I think the central bank needs to continue to be focused on making sure that inflation is under control. Now, obviously, part of it is related to, supply side, which other controls, which I think is very important. I think the whole discussion on the agriculture sector side, what can be done, one, to improve the yield of the agriculture sector, what can be done also to improve the link between the rural areas and urban areas. But also there is a big component which also can be done on the trade policy side. Now, one of the aspects is to increase production locally, but that will take time. So we cannot expect production to increase drastically in the coming few months. That usually takes time policies to yield. So one of the things that can be done is on the trade policy side, is to think through which sectors could be targeted, for instance, to look, for instance, at increasing a little bit, allow some tariffs to be adjusted, and that's a discussion to be done between the fiscal and the monetary policy, to see whether there is a way to take into account, the inflation dimension, the private sector dimension, the fiscal dimension, to see if these can help lower some of the price pressures on inflation side.
Sure, and just quickly, two very quick follow-on questions. Because you've mentioned tariffs, we haven't talked much about the impact of the global macroeconomic policy environment. We're now moving into an era of Trump first, talk about universal tariffs on China, which will rebound around the world. We're trying to tackle inflation. We're potentially moving into another monetary tightening circle globally, maybe due to Trump, who knows. Just one or two comments on what Nigeria should be doing. And then secondly, when we saw the heat map that was presented by Dr. Misaki, one of the most positive indicators was Nigeria's trade balance, if I recall. And typically in economics, you often say a weaker exchange rate supports exports. How do we kind of balance that trade-off? Just a couple of comments on that.
Sure, yeah, I think the current global context will make it a little bit harder to the policymakers in Nigeria. And on, I think, two main fronts. So one of them could be positive, is depending on the oil price. Now, obviously, if the oil price increases, maybe it could push inflation a little bit, but also the fiscal revenues will increase and export will increase. So it has both ways into it. I think where it will be a little bit more tricky, and we'll see how policies will be implemented, is on the monetary policy side. As you said, if tariffs come in, most likely inflation in the US will be higher. That means global interest rates might be higher for longer, which could impact how portfolio investors, would look at Nigeria and how that interest rates will impact Nigeria. And I think this is very critical for, specifically, I think, the monetary policies to keep that policy of having a more flexible exchange rate to allow the shock to happen. So otherwise, that will be impacted by reserves. So in that sense, I think what the CBN and the fiscal policies needs to be always data-driven and keep monitoring things as they go. But I think it's important to keep what they were doing over the past year and to allow, if you want, monitoring events and allow that flexibility in terms of how to deal with this shock. Sorry, what was the second point?
Yeah, very quickly.
So on the trade aspect, I think what we have seen interestingly over the past year is that the big increase in the trade improvement was mainly done through a reduction in imports because products have increased. And interestingly, what drove that reduction in imports is the reduction in import on PMS, which basically suggests that there was a lot of PMS that was smuggled out of Nigeria. And we're seeing the consumption of PMS going from 70 million barrels per day to around 50 million barrels per day. Now, where I think that's a good opportunity is that the opportunity of trade or the competitive currency is very important, but would not be enough without other reforms. And this is where I think 2025 should be really a year where other reforms would be important to be done to kickstart that process of diversification?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And speaking of other reforms, I'm going to come to you again, Mr. Oyedele. You know, thinking through the tax policies and from what the little I've seen of the bill, you have one side of the fence that say this is a very progressive tax policy that's being proposed. But my question is kind of putting myself in the position of the layman and asking myself whether Nigeria's tax reforms are for big business or for ordinary Nigerians. But it's quite a diverse and very, you know, in-depth tax policy. Is there an underlying principle behind your tax reforms? If you look at Trump, we know he's all about big business, free market economics. What is the underpinning principle behind Nigeria's tax reforms, and who particularly stands to benefit?
Thank you very much. So the reforms are for all Nigerians. I think it's actually more for the low-income earners, the vulnerable, and then for small businesses, and of course you also need the large firms as well. So everybody has something in it for them that's significant. But I think, you know, the point around Trump and the impact of the rest of the world on the outlook for 2025, I like the way Sama addressed the point around tariffs, because when Trump says, I'm going to set up an external revenue service to tax the rest of the world so we can use it to take care of Americans. First, you can't tax the rest of the world. You can only do tariffs, and Americans will pay those tariffs. And that's why there's the risk of inflation in the US, which can then affect whether Fed will cut rate or whatever it is. But the other side to that is that if you raise tariff, clearly import into the US will reduce. Those guys will find other markets. China will be desperate to sell more to Nigeria, rest of Africa. Same thing with the EU. And that actually means more supply than demand for the rest of the world, which will help with price moderation. So there's the good side and the other part. Trump, while saying that he wants to tax the rest of the world, in one of the executive orders, America First Trade policy, there's another executive order he signed the same day on the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, where he says to them, the rest of the world, you cannot tax the US. And he says, all these things you guys are agreeing about, global base, it's not going to apply to us until we decide we want it. I say, how on earth do you decide that your country lives in a different planet? You can tax the rest of the world, but they cannot tax you. But I think what's most important for us in Nigeria as policymakers is not to be reactive. You have to anticipate those scenarios and say, how do you respond? Because the sacrifices that we have made in 2024 with the reforms, we need to now consolidate and begin to see the results in concrete terms to the ordinary person on the streets. So in that case, I think it's really important to emphasize that the reforms are for everyone. And this is supported by data, but I'm sure you won't give me enough time to start mentioning them. No, right. So a lot to look forward to, I think, will be transformational. In fact, supporting the monetary side, right? Let me just say 2 points quickly. So in the tax reform bills, there's a provision there to ask Nigerian businesses to pay all levies, taxes, and fees to the government in Naira. That is about a $4 billion problem that we have currently. We ask Nigerian business to go and buy dollars to pay Nigerian government. You add to the demand pressure, you add zero to the supply. That's easily off the market. The PMS subsidy removal, which has now been properly removed, and I say that because for the first time, we have the market structure to determine the price, no longer the NMPC. That amount shows that the demand or the consumption for PMS alone is down from around 70 million liters a day to around 40. You know what that means? That 30 million liters, whether it was fake consumption before or reconsumption, is that you've taken off an average of about $20 million demand every single day from the FS market. $20 million a day is over $7 billion a year. Add it to the $4 billion I just told you. So when you are removing pressure from the FS market And the outlook is positive. Productions of crude oil around 1.9 now. So we're likely to get to 1 million. So outputs are rising, demand is coming down, and I think that, in my view, shows that we should have stable Naira, we should have inflation should be down, productivity should be up. Altogether, yeah, I remain positive based on data.
Thank you. Thanks for that positive spin. I know the Nigeria Governors Forum are proposing some revisions, but is the expectation that despite those proposals, the reform bill will pass pretty much as is?
Yeah, so we've simulated the impact of what the governors are proposing. It will not change the outcomes materially. For example, our target of tax to GDP ratio of 18% in 3 years will be impacted partly by the rebasing of the GDP. We don't know what the numbers will be. We've modeled a 40% increase in GDP size. Take that together with what the governor said we should do, it has about 1.2% impact on tax to GDP ratio. It will not make the heaven to come down or the rain to stop falling. We'll still be fine. Okay. So overall, even with the recommendations from the governors, we're still on track.
Okay, so no major material impacts. Okay, one final question to Professor Erega before we open the floor for comments and questions. And it's really around the foreign capital flows, which did improve in 2024. And in fact, one of the things that I observed in 2024 is Nigeria did quite well despite relatively low levels of foreign inflows compared to previous years. But they're still largely skewed towards short-term instruments. So what strategies, in your mind, top 2 or 3, can we do to attract long-term FDI in some of our critical sectors? We talked about agriculture and others, but do you have any specific ones that you've been studying from an academic point of view that would really help catalyze foreign inflows?
Okay, right. Thank you so much. I think that one of the ways we can take advantage of high interest rate environment and the liberalized FX market that the central bank has taken, which is basically focusing on their price stability, is to see how we can attract more capital, long-term capital. And one way to do that is the collaboration between the monetary authority and the fiscal. And what do I mean? There are a number of public assets that need to be optimized. And when they are optimized, it will help to deepen the capital market and also, somehow attract, long-term capital instead of what we call the portfolio. So one way I think that could happen in terms of attracting FDI or what we call long-term capital is to optimize, public assets that currently not performing well. And that is one simple way. The other way, basically, is that I think that we probably need to have a situation where investment opportunities across all sectors, and I'm talking about all the ministries, right? Coming up with what we call sector master plan that shows what I call investment opportunities across all sectors, right? So that investors all around can begin to see clearly, and also simplify the process of, the investment process, whether through the PP or the ICRC and all of these agencies that are involved in the PP arrangement and driving investment into the country. The third approach that I might recommend is, and that comes down to ensuring greater stability in the economy. It stands for now, and we all agree that even though we have achieved some level of stability, and the government has done well around that, and by taking some of these reforms that they have done with regards to stopping what we call the large deficit financing that comes from the monetary authority, which we call the ways and means, and some of these reforms that have been taken, is for also on the other side, for us to achieve greater stability. And that comes to the point of this consolidation, right, that will complement what the monetary authority is doing. And so if we can achieve greater stability, which is on part of the effort for this year, then investors will see that level of confidence, and then will be able to, seeing Nigeria as an investment destination, therefore, which also sometimes has some implication around attracting FDI and not FDI. So security, right? That will also bring in some attraction of what we call every year. And finally, I also think that as a country, we also need to look beyond what I call the effort around infrastructure development is also very important in bringing down production costs. That could also attract, because currently now production cost is also a bit high, and so all efforts that are geared towards infrastructure development effort of this renewable agenda should be increased, and that will provide a number of infrastructure to bring down production costs and also, for productivity and attract investment in these sectors.
Thank you very much, Professor Raga. And just to give you a heads up, your sound is very poor. So maybe during the Q&A, you can take off the video to preserve some bandwidth there. So ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the panelists. I think they've done justice to the topic, giving the wide variety of issues to be discussed in such a short space of time. So we're going to take about 15 to 20 minutes just to field some comments and questions. Please keep them very brief and concise. You may direct them to any panelists you so choose. Also a reminder, we have Professor Iraga and Dr. Ibeke online. Please let us know who you are and what your affiliation is. Who would like to go first, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Friday Ohuche. I pay to serve as a member of the National Economic Advisory Council of Nesg, and I work for African Development Bank. My question first goes to Dr. Sama when he talked about the cost of not reforming. And when I looked at the presentation of Dr. Mishaki, I saw that he emphasized structural problems between 2015 and 2024. But my question is, those structural problems, were they not there in the previous periods that we performed? The economy seemed to be performing well. Because structural problems has always been at the core of the challenges we have with the economy. And my question to Dr. Sama is, if not reforming the structural imbalances we have, does it not drive the cost mainly of what we experience in terms of economic improvement in our economy? Because the cost of, just imagine the tax reform, look at the pressure, look at the resistance, and other reforms like the Constitutional Amendment, and these are the things that are really keeping us down over the years, over the decades. So that's why. The second question goes to this. He was talking about this discussion with economists about inflation and about the volume of expenditure. But I also want to remind you about the velocity. If we go to the Fisher equation, velocity is a critical part of what causes price level changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go to another question, I'm told that the CBN Governor, Mr. Yemi Cardoso, would like to comment on some of the discussion we've had so far. So maybe we'll just hold your questions for now, and then we'll go to the CBN Governor online, please. Mr. Cardoso, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a quick one. And to be honest, it is something I had said during the course of my presentation. And I really don't want us to lose track of this. And that is how important it is to have these kinds of conversations and sit around the table and do this on a continuous basis. And let me say why I say this. Here we are reading now statistics as to what has happened over the recent past and how we got to where we are. My sense, and I can't help feeling this, is that if some of these discussions had taken place earlier during the course of when these things were happening, we perhaps may not be where we are today. And that conversation, you can never tire for it. It must be one that is open, and people must be confident enough to bring out their issues and their concerns, because it is only by doing that over and over and over again that you can really hope to create understanding of what the issues are. And that same thing goes for me, because right now at the central bank, we've been at the heart of taking some very, very difficult but necessary measures. And it is important for people to know why we are doing that and what the road of travel is. For example, a lot of people complain about the high interest rates, and that's killing the real sector. Yes, it is indeed. It is a risk to the real sector. But the truth of the matter is that the choices are very minimal, and the anticipation is that this would be something that would be more short than longer lived. And in fact, it's important that people should understand that the real killer is the one on inflation, which affects everybody, as opposed to the interest rates on the real sector. So I think back to the issue of continuous dialogue and having forums like this and publishing them widely so that people understand, a lot better as to what the issues are. That's really what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor, for graciously actually staying on. I didn't realize you were still online and contributing that perspective, which really supports the work that NESG is doing. Thank you very much, sir.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So please, are you able to respond to the question, Dr. Samir?
Sure, thanks so much. No, I want to kind of put the answer in a way that NESG presented the scenarios, right? And I really like the way it was presented, because at some point in one of the picture, if I remember, it says if we reverse these reforms, it was a fire, right? So I remember there was a picture of fire. And that was what's happening in Nigeria. And I remember back in May, early 2023, I remember there was a headline in Nigeria saying Nigeria, the country of 3 Qs. Q for petrol, Q for cash, and Q for the voting card. And that basically, for me, kind of summarized the issue. So obviously, in the past, the structural issues were there, but some of the issues came more or less recently. Like ways and means only started in 2018, and it jumped from 0% of GDP to 12% of GDP in just 4 years. That's unprecedented. And actually, since 2021, Nigeria was actually a country. It was on an economic terms called an oil exporting, but it was behaving like an oil importing country. Like oil prices in 2022 skyrocketed while reserves went down. So obviously structural issues have been there, they still are there, but there are some few, I would say, policies that happened back in the previous few years that were exacerbated by COVID and the external shocks. So we need to also acknowledge that make things worse. Now, I think the question is, are these policies enough to kind of get to the 5 or 6% growth? I think that's debatable, but at least they stopped the bleeding from going into the Sri Lanka case or to the Venezuela case, where it's funny because I was in Washington last week, and I had our colleague who was working on Sri Lanka. He has the money to pay for food, but he was telling me there was no food. So I think that's the thought of what would have happened. It's very hard to explain, but it's easy to put the case of Sri Lanka, Venezuela. That would have been the case if these tough policies would have not taken. Now the question is, structural reforms are needed? Of course, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there was the issue around the velocity. Was it of inflation? Yeah. Yeah, I think that was addressed to you specifically.
Yeah, so like I like to challenge assumptions, and I do that a lot. So the point I'm trying to make, I'll say is neutral about velocity of money. My point is that if the fiscal authorities are spending money, that does not mean that in and of itself it will fuel inflation. Otherwise, the Nordic countries should have the highest inflation in the world. These guys spend like 40% of GDP every single year. Our spending as a percentage of GDP from the government side, it's under 15%, right? So my point is, we shouldn't print new money to spend. Thank God we're not printing anymore. Number 2 is, government should be intentional in how they spend their money. Because there's a way you can spend the money and it will stimulate growth, and there's a way they can spend it and it will create more problems. If you just look at the data also as well, you will see that for the whole of 2024, right, the only 2 months that we had a decline in the rate of inflation, because there was still inflation, right? The rate just declined, was July and August. And it was driven by food, because food is the biggest component. Then in December, we had only 20 basis points month on month. That is significant, and for me, it's a pointer to what to expect in 2025, although you can establish trend with 1 month. The other point is, even though we're going to rebase the CPI basket, if you think about food inflation, there's a 500 basis points on the average between rural inflation for food and urban inflation for food. How do you explain that? Because that's transportation and the multiple levies. People are carrying yam from the north to the south, and they stop them 50 times. They pay over 700,000. One truck. You get to Lagos, people can't afford yam. So we are now truly, in my view, from the fiscal and the monetary side, complementing ourselves along with trade, and I think the results will begin to come in 2024. So people will say cash in circulation, yeah, 4%. Sorry, not 4%, 4 trillion or something. So my point is, it's not a problem, right? Cash in circulation is the cash you're supposed to use to buy pure water and buy a bottle of drink. And as a percentage of GDP, as well as per capita, it's less than 2% of GDP. On the average, many countries have 10%. So when we're doing our analysis and trying to identify where the problems are coming from, let's get the diagnosis right, so we can focus on prescription that will address the problems, not the ones that will complicate them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyedele and Dr. Samia. There's a question here which I'd like to direct to Dr. Ebeke online. It's from Jide Ayebusi, and he says, how do we ensure the economy is not growing at the expense of the common man on the street? There's also a question for NESG, but I'll leave that to the very last comment. And maybe Dr. Misaki will address that, or Dr. Adeloju. It says, is there a possibility to push beyond the 0.9 instability indicator, and what's the best path to achieving that? So Dr. Ebeke, I'll come to you first, please.
All right, thank you. And again, a set of really, really great questions. I think the issue that we're facing in Nigeria right now is the following conundrum, right? So you are implementing reforms and you want to shorten the lag effect from this reform. You want to front load the gains, and the way to do that, obviously, is that you have to rethink the way you're doing actually, or you implement structural reforms. Initially, we all know as economists that reforms have some delays, right? You're going to feel the positive impact of reform after a couple of years. This is a decade of literature on structural reform, but I think in Nigeria, as in many other African countries, you don't have this luxury of time. You have to front load the gains. And again, for the common man, this will mean you will need to better sequence and bundle these reforms. So I would say the front loading of structural reform gains in an emerging market like Nigeria is one of the key challenges that is in front of us. The sequencing is very important, and NESG mentioned it, the bundling, obviously. So you will need to think about structural reform with guardrails, right? You want to make sure that anything you do on the fiscal front, for example, any tax reduction or consequences from this reform. On the monetary front of fiscal policy or the policy mix in general, you want to make sure that the tax that is impacting the poor the most, which is inflation, is dealt with in a more durable fashion. But the sequencing and the bundling of structural reform is what is going to take you very far, right? To do that, you need to have contingency planning also in place. And I think in many of our countries in Africa, sometimes, many policymakers do not have this longer term view, but also even in the short term, early warning mechanism at the macro level to start addressing potential downside risks that may come. Let's say this year oil prices go down, is one possible scenario, or there is high volatility in financial markets because of risk of shock. What is the type of contingency plan that is developed what will be the response of monetary policy in coordination with fiscal policy to address these huge potential downside risks that may come? Including big area, will be significant given the high interest rate environment. So I think contingency planning is key, very important, and this is data driven. At the same time, you want to front load the gains from reform by packaging and bundling them. And at the same time, again, you need to have the guardrails. And this is why I keep saying that social protection is very important to address the distributional consequences of these reforms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibeke. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions from the floor. Yeah, I see a lady in the back there, and I'll take the gentleman in front as well, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Permit me to stand under the existing protocols. My name is Nana Abu, a senior manager with KPMG, and also a member of the Fiscal Policy and Planning Thematic Group of the Nesg. Thank you so much for the session and to all the insightful perspectives shared by the panelists. My question is to Mr. Taiwo Yodele regarding the bills. I know a lot has been said regarding the tax bill, but we are aware that there are other bills that would aid the implementation of the tax bill itself. And we really haven't heard, a lot about that. And then considering that, in line with national tax policies and global standards, when bills are enacted, there's supposed to be a certain time frame for the act, when enacted, to be implemented by the relevant stakeholders. So in line with all the other bills that are supposed to support and implement, the tax bill itself, what's the conversation around those bills? When do we see the likelihood of these bills passed, and then when exactly will it be implemented, knowing that if a bill is implemented now, companies need to adjust, other stakeholders need to adjust, and then we know that there are surrounding circumstances around the other bills. How do we intend to harmonize all of this in line with minimizing disruptions? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Yes, very good question. So first, you're right. So we have the tax bills, and then we have other bills. Apart from bills, we also have executive orders. We have regulations, like the withholding tax regulation was gazetted last year, took effect 1st of January this month, or this year. So we're making progress even while we're still discussing the tax bills. While you are right that those other bills are complementary, they don't necessarily need to be out at the same time for the reforms to take a life of its own. It was actually more of facing. We intentionally said, let's put the tax bills forward while we're working on the other bills. And of course, you can't add anything to the tax bill as we speak now. You just allow the lawmakers to focus on the budget. After the budget, they come back to the tax bills. And because we've been able to address the biggest hurdle, which is the governance, I think it was last week now, I'm losing track of time, we are now confident that the lawmakers will be able to pass the bills latest by the end of Q1. So let's say that takes us to end of March. I think it will happen before then. In line with the national tax policy, we then give a minimum of 3 months so people can prepare. People should already be preparing, right? Because they are aware. But then once it's signed into law, it's now cast in stone. You now know what you need to do. Do you need a new software? Do you need some training, capacity building? Not even just for taxpayers, but even for the tax authorities. And so we think we can then give another 3 months, and then these reforms can commence from the second half, which is around 1st of July. So that way would have complied with international best practice and allowing people to prepare for what they need to do. So that is the way we are looking at them. And then after that, you now see these other reforms. For example, you take the Fiscal Responsibility Acts. We have a lot of beautiful provisions there, but they have no consequences. Say, don't borrow more than this amount of previous revenue as ways and means. We just exceed it and heaven will not fall, right? We can't continue like that. We need to be clear. What are those fiscal limits? Do they make sense? Once you set them, they must be respected. That's how you demonstrate rule of law and governance. Sometimes you may think that, well, it's government to government, we can do anything we like, but the signaling that people see is that if you can't even respect your laws, is it me that will come and invest and you respect the terms? So these things have bigger consequences at the end of the day.
Thank you. So implementation H2 2025. And we probably will then start to see the real economic impacts and effects from 2026.
I think some of it you will still see in 2025. Like I said, many of the measures were not based on the tax bills, right?
Okay,
They're already being implemented. And some of the ones in the tax bills you implement very quickly. If you're exempting low-income earners from paying taxes, it happens the following day, right? Next time they collect their salary, they have more disposable income. And as we have seen, despite the minimum wage adjustment, we didn't see the impact on inflation really. Because the worry is that when you pay low-income earners, they hit the markets. And that supports my own view that our inflation is not largely driven by excess money supply or excess demand. It was cost pushed. Okay. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I think we can take one more question here. Yes, please, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Demola Shokunle. I'm a director of Nesg. I've got a question and a comment. And the first one is to leverage what the CBN governor said in terms of encouraging Nesg to hold this kind of event, and is to let us know that now the environment is more conducive for us to be able to do this on a more regular basis. In the past, it wasn't, because we have key players either on the monetary policy side, fiscal side, even government side, that were not really open to some of these things. And somebody like, Mr. Taiwo, you remember, we were at a retreat in Ogere. It cost you a lot of problems. Yeah. Cost me personally, my organization, a lot of problems, even the former chairman of Nesg, just trying to hold this kind of event, and where you are separating noise from substance, and you are trying to hold people accountable as to how we should move forward. So we should leverage, what the governor has said, so as to be able to do, this on a regular basis. So that's number one. Number two, I'm also trying to make sure that we can take advantage of this event to give comfort to Nigerians in terms of inflation expectation, especially with respect to the proposed telecom tariff hike. I don't know who is good. Maybe Taiwo, you want to handle that, so that we won't just think that, because of 50%, then inflation is going to go away, because there is so much noise instead of substance. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic one. Thanks for raising that point, because it goes back to the issue about inflation expectation. It's really very important. If you look at it today, the telecommunication is only 1% of CPI, right? If we rebase it, which is what we are planning to do, my expectation is to be around 2.5 to 3 max. And how do you just look at the revenue of that sector compared to GDP? So let's use the worst case scenario, right? That it accounts for up to 3%. If you increase that 3% by 50%, it gives you 1.5, which is 150 basis points. 150 basis points as a percentage of the CPI basket is 2 basis points. So in other words, if you just follow this my analysis, if inflation was meant to be 15%, it would be 15.02%. If we then create an expectation of inflation, we'll have a ripple effect that will be more than my analysis. And I also think the way the regulator is going about it is actually very positive. They're saying you can't just, because we say you can increase up to, you know the word is up to, not 50, up to 50. You don't just go ahead and increase like that. They want to be able to align those increases with quality and productivity. So if quality, look at the way we're struggling with the online thing, right? If quality goes up of their services, productivity gain will far exceed that amount we're paying as extra amounts. Yeah.
So, just to kind of break it down further. So what you're essentially saying is that demand for telecom services is relatively demand inelastic.
Yeah, I believe so.
Essentially, a hike in telecoms tariffs of up to 50% is not going to shift the market much for consumers, because it's a relatively small share of maybe household expenditure compared to, say, food or other types of things.
There's this, I can't remember where I read about this. the Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory was developed when we didn't have telecommunications. Right? And people say you must put it under physiological need. Some people will buy data before they eat.
Absolutely. So it's price inelastic.
I think it's likely inelastic.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a really important point. And the issue around consumer awareness and education is really key, because as Nigerians, we love to jump on the bandwagon a lot. So I think that was a very good point that was raised by Dr. Shogunle. Thank you very much. The last question I'll have to give over to NESG. There was a question from Similoluwa Emmanuel, who talked about the 0.9 instability indicator, which is where you're predicting we would end. Can we raise that? Or actually technically lower it because it's a negative figure? Thank you.
Yeah. So it looks like it's low. We are saying the territory, but don't let's look at the destination. Let's look at the journey. Moving from minus 2.5 to minus 0.9 is huge, extremely huge. It's like the analysis of inflation at the base effect. You will end up being in minus 0.9, it will feel like we are already at the stability region. And so it's not just as direct as we put it, separate things. In reality, if we can achieve that, more or less we are the stability region, really, because of the rate of change from that lowest point within a year. Look at how we descended from 2016 crisis, recession, 2020 post-pandemic, to now taking it just within a year. That's huge. So the idea is not can we put it up. The idea is can we even get there? Yeah. And if we achieve it, that's solid. That puts all these discussions within the central context of we are really going there this year.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mishaki. I'd like to thank once again our panelists, those online, Dr. Ebeke and Professor Rega, and in the room here, Mr. Oyedele and Dr. Samir. They say that narrow is the way that leads to heaven. Nigeria's economic heaven is within, well, I guess, striking distance. And we've had some really cautious optimism today around that road and trajectory. So hopefully we will swim and not sink, and we're all in this together. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. It's been a pleasure to moderate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you, Rolake, for an amazing moderation of this session. We will have photos right now with... Sir, I think you should be part of this photo. Can you just quickly. Can we have board members of the NESG? Mr. Tayo. Rolake in the center. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's amazing that Dr. Sama talked about Sri Lanka. I personally have someone who just visited Sri Lanka this week and is there and testifies to the situation there, where 2 years ago, as of 2022, you would walk into a store and everything you see will be cases. So you would see cans of milk, but it's empty. So if you want to buy it, you can bring out the milk from the safe because they were vandalizing, it was that bad. But 2 years after, which points to the positivity and the fact that there is hope, 2 years after, you can actually walk into a store and people are visiting. Nigerians are there right now. So I think for us as Nigerians, while there's a lot of noise, it's important to look at the macros and look at how these things impact real life and see how it's changing, and in our own individual situations, find how to plug into it and add to the conversation. And finally, we would like to invite Dr. Tayo Aduloju, I hope I pronounced it well, for the closing remarks. Thank you, sir.
Wow. I think we've been macroeconomically fed. It's but ladies and gentlemen, I think the robust conversations we've had on the macroeconomic outlook, one tells us that this is not a linear set of solutions where you come in with a crystal ball, announce a GDP figure, we go home. I think that approach, that whole approach to outlook is an approach that we've departed from completely as a practice and at the NESG. Economics at its best as a profession does its optimal work. We're evaluative, prescriptive, and actually even the capacity to do, any strategic forecasts only form the basis for solutions. It's actually the problem-solving mode of economics that allows it to achieve its highest objectives, especially when the values are clear. I think the values of the reforms we must pursue are very clear. One, we cannot pursue any of these economic reforms outside the context of a country that must now take itself very seriously. So governance has to be at the heart of these conversations we have. Number two, I think whether you call it, it is the strategic partnerships required for massive transformative shifts, the collaboration, the cooperations, the coordination, has been overflogged again and again, and the values of those remain critical to how we couple together monetary fiscal policy, fiscal trade, fiscal sectoral. Mr. Edele was talking about our last week, national, subnational with the governors. And actually, the interesting perspective that the governors had to numbers and evidence, I found that to be interesting from our conversations. But it illustrates that second value of strategic partnerships across board. The third is burning platforms. I think the central bank governor stressed it. We need to create more spaces for the rigorous conversations needed to achieve scale of understanding. These are very complex terminologies we use all the time, so the capacity to continue to decompose and break them down so that the average Nigerian understands what is the headline, what is the storyline, what's the summary, what next, has to happen in a more structured and more consistent format. TED values of what we've kind of heard today. I think the fourth is just the scale of the institutional capacity to execute. There's so much we've spoken about, but moving from point A to point B requires many actors to commit and come along at scale. And how do we, one, inform those actors enough to know what to act on, two, inspire them to do this difficult work and keep them motivated, three, hold all of them accountable, track, monitor, so that, on a quarter-to-quarter basis, we can celebrate the execution that is turning the corner. And last, I think, is the trick, right? It is this idea of you can't do one of these things or the other any longer. The binary approach to, let's stabilize first, then let's grow later. It seems as if that script has gone also. It is almost a parallel coupling of strategic actions across a broad-based set of multi-actors executing together to lift Nigeria up. I think the challenge is as complex as explaining the macro, but the fact that we're here, right, tells us that, and that we can think it through, tells us it's possible, it's doable. And if you listen to the actors in the room, there was a lot of, I think, the power of optimism, just the amount of positive energy, beyond the numbers, beyond whether it's 14% inflation or 23% or or 5 or 11, in fact. It's the optimism backed by the ideas, the commitment on the strategies that will make the difference. And so it's again to thank the panelists, all distinguished in their own right. Please give them a big round of applause. And all very busy people, you know, to get them like one Nigerian generation says it's not beans, you know, but but they are here, and it's to thank them for the commitment to this ongoing conversations. Taiwo, we are proud of you. You know, you're a member of the community, but you're also a leader in the community, and so we know this is hard work. All we can say is well done. Sama and ourselves and the World Bank have been at it for years. Again, we thank the World Bank for its support in thinking about these problems. I think Nigerians beat the World Bank and the IMF a lot into the media, under the premise that I think they say you shove proposals and we digest it. But I have been part of a very interesting cycle of World Bank and IMF chiefs in the last 8 years who insist that their proposals should not be digested by Nigeria whole line and sinker. In fact, they put it up front. Please, you can't digest this proposal. These are just ideas. We need to hear what you have to say. And so what I found out is that we get more from the IMF and the World Bank when we put them in these pressure environments and our ideas are being forced into the discussion, we'll get far more. And they do far better, by the way. So I think the future of our dialogues with IMF and the World Bank is homegrown solutions, homegrown ideas, forced into a room where it bakes well, right? And those optimal solutions come out. Our last is just commitment, you know, is to thank the board members who have been here with us all day, thank the guests who have been here very early, thank the central bank governor, who, as you noticed, did not just give his keynote and run away, but sat through the entire conversation, and he and I were actually, you know, going back and forth on a couple of ideas. So I was actively thinking about the panel and what to do with it. I think we have his commitment to several engagements during the year where we come back, pick a piece of the puzzle, break it down, look at it, and make progress with those. And so we want to thank him for that commitment. Please, let's give him a hand. Because I think it was not a commitment to just the keynote. It was a commitment to let's enter this thing, you know, debate the difficult issues and make progress. And just audience online and physically, thank you so much. The reports themselves are robust. There's a whole strategic framework section of this outlook, please, that contains, it goes into breakdowns, you know, trade-offs, risk profile, mapping, analysis tools. I want to encourage chief risk officers, chief strategy officers to dive in, you know, send us some difficult, let's get some difficult feedback after your analysis on how this will matter to sectors. We're going to hold outlook events, the quarterly outlook events every quarter for the private sector specifically, which is a different format because we then look at private sectors outlook for those sectors. Please look out for those. And yeah, this is going to be a very active year of engaging because if 5% is possible to us, we must get it done. Have a lovely weekend, lovely rest of the week, lovely rest of the month. Happy New Year one last time in arrears. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, we would like to take pictures outside with the chairman, CEO, and board.